So hello, Harry. We've got Harry Duran. Is that right, Harry Duran?
Duran, like Duran.
All right, good. Harry Duran on Elevate. And Harry is the founder of FullCast, a full service, done for you podcast production and marketing consultancy. He is the host of the popular Podcast Junkies on iTunes since 2014, and has over 274 interesting and engaging podcasts. I want to put a bookmark on that at some point, Harry, because there's something there. And as a heart centered host, consultant, and coach, Harry empowers others to amplify their authority through the power of a podcast. And as a speaker, Harry challenges leaders to understand the importance of finding their unique voice. So, again, welcome, Harry. I was struck with the amount of episodes you've done on your podcast, 274. I've looked through pretty much all, and you've got a wide variety of guests with so many interests. I'm curious to know what those 274 podcasts have taught you. What gifts were presented, and I'm sure it's ongoing as far as you interviewing and connecting with people.
I'm trying to think of the best way to share those learnings. If you add in the episodes I've done for another show I've launched called Vertical Farming, it's probably like 30 plus episodes there. So we're well over 300 now.
Wow.
And I think what might be helpful is some context into how I started on this podcast journey.
Yeah, because I want to talk a little bit about purpose as well, because I think that's something that underlies both you and I. There are some themes that collectively that I'd love to talk about, which is heart-centered and conscious leadership, empowerment. What does that mean? And there was something else just slipped my mind right now.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, let's start there.
So I was in corporate for over 20 years. Worked at JP Morgan Chase and E-Trade and marketing. And it never felt like a calling to me. And I sort of, in a way, lucked out because I had what I call a corporate godfather who took a liking to me. I actually started in the branches, like as a teller. Like I started as a bank teller, and then I got promoted within that. And then I made it to the other side of the floor and then started opening up accounts and then was recruited for other projects. And so I didn't finish college. So it's sort of like, oh, this is my career. This is what I'm doing now. And then, you start making a decent salary. And it's like, I remember my boss sitting me down and saying, your 6-figure salary puts you like in the top 10% of all income earners. And so when you're in your 20s, you're like, oh, this is, or, the 20s, you're like, oh, this is exciting times for me. You had thought you had made it. But, there was always like a need, like an entrepreneurial itch. And I don't think it was as clear for me as it was for other people who, were selling cookies at like 6 years old and started their first business. So I had stops and starts along the way. In 99, I followed a .com craze. And so I left my job. I cashed out my 401k to zero, which wasn't going to be the first time. And I went to go work with a startup, a Latino portal. I'm Latino. I was born in El Salvador, and I was not getting paid, and I had some random title of VP operations. After about a year, obviously that didn't pan out, and so I had to get a job as I remember getting a job as a waiter, and then my corporate godfather came to the rescue again. He got me another job back, I think at that point, back with JP Morgan Chase. So it's been an interesting journey. I left in 2000. I was living in New York City. I was there for 9/11. I experienced 9/11 in New York City, which was an interesting event. I went to go work in, of all things, construction. I had a half brother who I'd reconnected with. He had a construction business in Atlanta, Georgia. Wow. And I went to go do that. So I went to go working from like IT to putting on hard hat and boots and climbing scaffolds and learning how to do takeoffs on blueprints. So that was interesting. But after about a year and a half of that, as with most family businesses that didn't pan out. So I remember flying back home with my tail between my legs because I was like going to go live with my parents at like 34 back in New York. And
Did you feel defeated?
yeah, oh yeah,
Because your measure of success was not quite there yet. What was that gauge? Maybe that's a more poignant question. What was that gauge for success for you? Was it the money?
money, yeah, money,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. I mean, and kudos to my dad early on. Like, there's a thread of me listening to other people's voices in the
Right.
beginning. So it's your father early on. He's like, go to college, get a degree, and I made it through a year and a half at Syracuse University, and then was not prepared for that experience at all. And it's I, and so after a year and a half, my parents were like, we're paying a lot of money for this, and it's not panning
Right.
out. So maybe let's try something else. So that was an interesting lesson.
What was
And
what was that interesting experience that you weren't quite ready for? Maybe expand on that a little bit more.
I just had to handle like that freedom.
Right.
Just had to handle like the autonomy,
The
thinking you're
independence.
yeah independence, thinking you're adult when you're really not.
Right. Because nothing really prepares you, right, to get to that point and that level of responsibility.
Yeah,
Right.
and just even things like managing that first credit card they stick in your hands, and I, there's a thread there because there's something energetically that I feel is multi generational in terms of like a cycle I need to break because it's just got me to like this cycle and spiral of debt and that I'm still kind of working through. So there's a lot of repercussions of stuff that
Mm.
I wasn't just taught. Um, and to no one's fault. It's just like things that are not made aware and things that at that age are not made to understand are important.
Mhm.
And so, but I remember my dad playing Dale Carnegie. I think it was Dale Carnegie or Think and Grow Rich, and things like The Richest Man in Babylon. I remember that was a book he gave me. And so this old school teachings, and I really wish I had paid more attention because it's stuff that I read now and like Napoleon Hill,
Yeah.
like all this inspirational stuff that's really, really timeless.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that it didn't resonate with me back then, but it was just that journey that I was on. And so like my dad, saying go to college, my boss telling me like, hey, you've got this great salary. My half brother telling me, hey, come work with me. My friend now, we're friends now in that .com, like, just come join this company. And just like I felt like I was riding coattails for a long period of time. And I think it was only when I started to figure out like, there's no one that's going to do this but me. Like I need to figure this out, and I need to take the plunge. And I'd say I got nudged because I left my a job at E-Trade and I was doing consultancy, but I'd started the podcast in 2014
Yeah.
and Podcast Junkies. And the way that started actually going even further back in time was I've always had a passion for electronic music. Like I grew up DJing. I recently got my turntables out of storage, so I've learned how to beat match on vinyl, and it's
Right.
one of my proudest accomplishments. And I remember like being like 15 and seeing DJs play, and I'm like, I want to do that.
Right.
And it was interesting because I realized that person was managing the energy of the room. I was like, this is fascinating. Like he's controlling like the ups and the downs, and then like people are
Yeah.
like run to the dance floor, like
Mm.
you know. So it was really exciting, and I love the music, and it's been a passion of mine. So I created a mobile app around 2013 at the time because it was again the entrepreneurial bug. I was trying these things, and so it was called Know Your DJ, and um, podcasting was sort of making its way into my circle, and I was like, oh, podcast. Prior to then, a podcast was a mixtape, like an upload. Like if someone told me I've got a podcast, I was like, oh, you're a DJ, you're going to upload a mix. This
Right.
was around 2011, 12. I wasn't aware that there were podcasts where people were actually speaking and talking. So the irony is fun because that's what I do now. But so I was learning about mobile apps. I was like, oh, these mobile apps. I was like, there's a conference in Las Vegas in 2014 called New Media Expo. It was bloggers, YouTubers, and podcasters. So that dates it a bit. And I saw these podcasters there. There's a couple that are still podcasting now, Amy Porterfield, Pat Flynn. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I pivoted. I said, I'm not going to. The original thought was to create a podcast to interview DJs, right? But I was like, oh, that's going to be hard, chasing down these globe-trotting DJs. I'm going to create a show where I interview podcasters. And then one of the other threads that I was early on, I think, of me trying to do my own thing was I studied acting for a while. I had headshots taken, and I always remember that show Inside the Actor Studio.
Oh, I love that
It
show.
was really fascinating because I was like, oh, look at these actors. I don't know anything about them, but on this show, like they're talking about like their personal lives. I was like,
Right.
that's cool. So that all is so funny when you think about all the threads that are coming together. So it's like my love of music, electronic music, led me to like learn about podcasting. But this thread of like understanding acting had this reminded me of this show. So I put them all together. Podcast Junkies was like that concept. I want to speak to podcasters and I want to learn what was the inspiration for the show. And as an aside, and as a complement to that, I don't know anybody in podcasting. So what better way to meet people in podcasting than to interview podcasters?
Brilliant.
So that started in 2014. In parallel to that, my job was like winding down and the writing was on the wall. I was doing something that I was okay at, but it wasn't my specialty. And I could see that they were probably going to hire someone that could do my job better. And so I just hired a business coach. I was paying him $1,500 a month. And at the time, it was like a lot of money. Like, I'm like, wait, so I pay you this, and then what do I get in my hand? Like, and this concept of getting paid for your intellectual property, for
Right.
like helping you teach something that's like shortening the learning curve, like helping you understand like opportunity cost. Like, because I was working and I swam in the deep end because I joined this group and I started showing up for these events, and I was just completely overwhelmed. I was like, these people are like making 6 and 7 figures, really successful businesses, and I was like, whoa, how the hell do you do this? And I quickly understood like this idea of opportunity cost. Like they know what an hour of their time is worth.
Right.
And it made more sense to pay this coach to help them accelerate their business, make more money per month in whatever aspects of the frameworks that he was teaching. And so they valued that. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So as I started doing my podcast, I'm like, this is a service that people need. I know all the ins and outs of it because in the beginning as a podcaster, I did everything. Like I booked the guests, I scheduled the guests, I had the interview, I wrote the show notes, I created the website, I created all the socials, created the graphics, I posted it on all the socials. I was literally doing everything. I bought T-shirts. I would go to these conferences and I would like hand out 50 of these shirts for free just to build up, exposure for the show because it has a bright yellow background and with black letters and just all these little things. And I started to get known in the space, and people would be like, "Oh, are you bringing the T-shirts next year?" So these little things. And I realized if I could package this up into a done for you service, the people that are in this mastermind, they understand the value of that. And lo and behold, I remember I was giving an example of the service and someone said, hey, on a break, he's like, hey, when that service is ready, let me know. I'd be interested. And so that's the story of how I got my first client.
I want to segue back because you've got a similar pathway as I did within the corporate structure where you were doing a work, you were getting paid well, but inside of you, and I'm just paraphrasing from what I've heard, you didn't feel a sense of fulfillment or a sense of purpose. Is that would I be right in saying that?
It's interesting. I don't know that I was thinking about fulfillment or purpose at the time because I would get these jobs. I remember in one of my jobs early on, my corporate godfather, David, shout out to David. He's like, I got a new position. It's a project manager. He's like, can you do that? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I can do that. And so I remember we hung up the phone and I basically made, and this dates it as well. I made my way to Barnes and Noble and I bought 3 books on project management. And I was like, I can figure this out. Like I was really good with like computers and I really understood. I'm organized. So I was like, I understood the concepts. And then I just kind of showed up and I learned on the job. But it's that I've always did it because I could figure it out. It's not like I was doing these things. It's not like I majored in business or I majored in finance or I majored in like organization. Like I was figuring out what I needed to do to keep making money and to keep getting paid and to keep my 6-figure salary going. But I think what started to happen is sort of like I got put in these positions, and towards the end of like the E-Trade job, I was like in a really good position. I got promoted to director, but I was in it over my head. Like it was just wasn't a good fit, and the job and the position didn't pan out. So I was forced to take another job, and through my social network, got that job. But again, it was just a holdover job, and the writing was on the walls, like, you know, I have to do my own thing because I need to control my own destiny, and obviously, it's almost like I became an entrepreneur out of sort of the need for to have like to keep income coming in, and that day when your direct deposit ends and you no longer get that money
Yes.
magically deposited in your bank account, you know, twice a month, it's really sobering. And I'm just like, okay, like there's this concept that entrepreneurs talk about a lot about burning the boats, and it's like I really, and that's one of the reasons why like I cashed out the 401k early on, is like I didn't have a plan B, and I probably could have handled that differently. And there's a whole other segue of things I would do different now, especially just like how I handle it in the relationship I was at the time. But I just realized like I needed to figure this out, and that's why I hired a coach. I was like, I need someone who's going to accelerate the learning for me. And I wasn't thinking about things like purpose or mission. I was just like, I gotta pay the bills. I gotta keep the lights on.
So you were thinking essentially of survival, but
Survival.
along with that, because there's a very instinctual um, characteristic when you have that survival method. There's a lot of aspects that, for example, intuition that are not taking in because you're in that survival mode, right? But I think, maybe I'm wrong, as you were doing that, is it possible that you were looking for how you can also have some fulfillment in the way that, I mean, electronics is part of that. Your gift in connecting with people, because you connect with people very, very easily, in that, and then offering that service through discussion. Were you thinking something along those lines as far as how does that work, or that just happened along as you were moving along on your path?
I think I was moving into spaces where I was more comfortable. So I was very comfortable in like electronic music. So I'd actually done electronic music production. I took a class on mastering. So I knew audio really well. I felt comfortable in the audio space. And in the beginning, I was using like these complex tools to edit my podcast audio. I was using a tool called Ableton, which is just made for like
Yeah.
music production. The analogy I like to say is I was using a Ferrari to go pick up groceries. Like it was just too much. Like,
Yeah.
and so, but I knew it. I felt very confident, and like I knew I could understand these graphics tools. I understood editing. I was just naturally curious, and I got better in my interview skills. I would listen to other interviewers, and I'm like, oh, that's a good question they ask. So I was just a student of the craft, and it's something that I feel like I want to continue to continue to be better at as I continue. I'll never master it, but I just want to continuously improve. And so that was all happening, and I was like, oh, I feel confident in the space, and with the help of a coach, I'm able to craft this offer. So I started to do things that lit me up, and as I started to do that, I started to think about, this is later on, years later, just attending more spaces of folks that were more like conscious, more aware. Having these coaches who would ask like, "What's your mission?" Like doing speaker training. I took some speaker training that was very valuable for me in helping me craft my story, and I crafted it to like a 6-minute version, and I've used variations on it when I've spoken from stage. That was helpful for me to really think about like my journey, and I talked about this
Mhm.
concept of like following others, and this idea of like you know creating my own path. And what's interesting is, I love the medium of podcasting because I've talked about this mission of helping 1 million people find their voice. And so that resonates with me. And now, as I start to move more and become more vocal with being in the consciousness awareness space, what I'm doing is bringing in all the experience I've had probably in the past, 7 to 8, maybe 10 years of just this slow awakening
Mhm.
that I've had. And it started with like being introduced to Buddhism, and then just doing a deep dive into that, and then reading books about crop circles and light beings and star seeds, and just like that whole wave of books of like the Celestine Prophecy, Chicken Soup for the Soul, like Seed of the Soul, like all these like books are just like, whoa, this is like the 7 laws of spiritual success. Like I remember when someone gifted that book to me, I was just like, what are these teachings? They're like, I'm feeling them, on a visceral level, and they're resonating with me. And so, as is the case with most people on this journey, there's like ups and downs. You just like get into it, then you just fall out of it, and you get back into it. And then like I've had, I was introduced to a community, an ayahuasca community, and so I had that heart opening experience, and then just delving deeper into these subjects that are just really mysterious and really I've had plant medicine experiences, and just I've been more and more open, and it feels like it's more opening. I went through a challenging divorce, and I where I saw aspects of myself that I didn't like, and in hindsight, you always want to do things differently, but it's the path we were meant to be on. And I wish I could have shown up better through that experience, and just kind of working through that has been really helpful. Definitely a lot of dark night of the soul moments there as well. But just understanding even that term, like what that means, and just working with a therapist um, personally, and with my current relationship, just all these things that have started to just kind of bubble up, and are made themselves more aware in my life, and more present in my life. And so they've all culminated into me thinking about business in a way that's speaking to who I want to work with. And so I, I might have shared with you in our previous conversation that I posted something recently on LinkedIn and Facebook about this idea of coming out of the spiritual closet
Yeah.
and being clear in my message. Like, if you're all things for everyone, then you just sound like everyone else. And I'm like, I want to work with like conscious, awakened, spiritual business owners, and thought leaders who are actively working to improve the quality of the life on this planet, and increase awareness, increase expansiveness, expansion, and be their partner in terms of amplifying that message. And because of the what I know and understand with the world of podcasting, I feel like I have part of the tool set that can help them. And just um, and so now, to the roundabout answer to your question is, it feels like I am more in a space where I am starting to become more aware that I'm doing something that is opening up this awareness in me, helping me to open it up in other people who feel the need and feel that compulsion to share their message.
Because this notion of working with conscious, heart-centered leaders is a relatively new notion, and I'm curious to see what your experience has been in your interaction. I mean, they may not have that awareness at this moment, but there's something tangible within them, practice-wise, that they believed in. Whether they're good leaders, whether they allow their employees to be the best they can, they may not have that label. But what's your experience with individuals? Is this a movement that is starting, or is this a movement in action right now? Because it's a very curious time within business right now. I think the last 2 years within the pandemic has really created some profound shifts in awareness within not only with communities throughout, and the business community is no different.
Yeah, it does feel like something that's appearing more and more. Some of it has to do, depending on how deep we go down the spiritual rabbit hole, but there is a sense of an ascension. For there's a couple of different terms used for that process, but sort of like an awakening of the planet that's happening, and it's awakening things in people, and it feels like there's more conversations like this happening. Like, people are like, I wasn't that much into spiritualism, or I wasn't into meditation or intentions, but now, like, when people talk about it, I pay attention. um, there's a recent book I read by Joe Dispenza called Becoming Supernatural, and it's fascinating. I've always been a fan of his work on the periphery, but now I just read that book, and what's interesting is he ties the spiritual into the science of it. So how he talks about um, this idea of law of attraction, which got a bad rap with the movie from The Secret, but when you understand the concept, it has validity. But what he said is, not only do you need to make the intention, which he calls like the I think that's the electrical component, but then the magnetic component is the emotion. So you're marrying the intention with the emotion. So when you talk about these things, you need to act as if they've already happened.
Exactly.
And so it's been fascinating, like, reading things like that. I'm like, well, it resonates with me because maybe it's because I'm a Libra and the scales thing, but I'm always thinking like both sides of the brain. I'm like, I think about the logical, and even on the spiritual side, I come across concepts and I'm like, well, what's the specific like science of like, why is that happening? Like, I remember when I did Buddhism, or when I studied Buddhism early on, we had to do prostrations, which is a
Hmm.
really esoteric practice, but essentially you have to like kneel down and like spread your arms out and come back up. And we would do hundreds of these, and apparently to like activate energetic uh, things inside of you. And occasionally I'd have good experiences with that, but I'm just like how many do you need? Like the logical mind is like, do I need 1,000? Like I need to know like what's the magic number I'll hit on these when something will happen. And even meditation, like how long do I sit for meditation? And so I've always been challenged with like those aspects, but I think this awareness is happening a lot more, and it's been more active and present in me. This and like thanks to some of the experiences I had in ayahuasca, like I felt a divine connection to spirit, a direct communication that made it clear for me that organized religion is definitely not the way to go. I've always said that the way it's been described, which resonates with me, is that there's no one that should stand in the way of my direct connection with God.
Right.
And so, like, if I have a need, I'm just gonna call her on
Yeah.
speed dial and be like, okay, like let's figure something out here. And so, I think just being comfortable in the space so that I can speak the same language as the people who are in that space and have been there ahead of me and have been doing it for years, and so we can speak the same language and we can go down as deep of a rabbit hole with them as they like to. And then if they have a need to amplify that message, and if that's something that I can help with, I feel like that's a good fit.
So you described this notion of ayahuasca as a heart opening, but I've also heard you say that, you know, your Libran characteristics of being in the mind and analyzing. How do those two reconcile?
I had an experience once during a session where it was almost like I was given an instruction. It was like um, I think the way to explain it was like it was like an intervention, and it says it was like the brain. It was like instructions to the brain. It's like you're no longer in charge. Like from now on, all decisions have to get come through the heart. It was almost like a conference call. It was really interesting. It was
It's
like my
cool.
brain. It was like my brain, my heart, me, my soul. Like we were all in this meeting, and it's like, okay, here's what's going to happen. Like brain, you are no longer in charge. I know you've been helping us. God bless you. Thank you. You got us to this point, and you've been helpful for like, helping us succeed and survive. But now, we need to change leadership. Your heart is in charge, and all decisions now have to be routed through the heart, and then you can chime in afterwards, but the primary decision maker. So it was really funny, but it was really interesting to say like, yeah, like lead with like love first, and naturally, like every other message, you'll get it and you're like, yeah, this is it, my life has changed, and then like you proceed to make brain led decisions afterwards. But I think it's the awareness
Yeah.
to say like, how am I making a decision based out of like logic or based out of love? Am I making a decision based on fear, or am I making a decision based on trust? And you have to realize that that's an ongoing practice, and you have to actively seek out something, teachers, books, meditations that get you on that path. You're going to try a lot. You're going to kiss a lot of spiritual frogs, but I think you just have to figure out which one of those resonate. And some of these teachings and some of these messages and some of these books can get really far out there in terms of like this age of this planet and previous civilizations. And I'm fascinated by ancient civilizations, and
Yeah.
things that I've read about the true age of the Sphinx, and all this stuff is absolutely mind-blowing, fascinating for me. But I have to pick and choose which ones I want to focus on in the meantime. And for some of the stuff, as I've heard it described before, take what resonates and discard the rest. And I think that's really, really helpful advice.
Because at that point in path, you're ready to receive that price. And as you said, the ups and downs, you're integrating that information. As you integrate that information, you get a sense of comfort and confidence as you appropriate that information, and that opens more awareness, as it were. Um, it's curious. You talked about Dispensa, and you obviously know that Dispensa, Bruce Lipton, and the Great Brain and the Three Amigos,
Yeah.
all of those individuals really take a scientific approach into aspects of the heart. And they're also involved or have been engaged in heart math, which I'm a heart math trainer. And heart math, for those that don't know, have been actively engaged since 1993 to really scientifically prove the incredible properties of the heart. And it's my belief that certainly since 2012, as we shifted energies from masculine energies into feminine energies on this planet, and there are characteristics of feminine energy. It is something that we are walking into, which is the age of living in the heart and heart-centered characteristics. And so how I can characterize that is intuition becomes a big factor in following your intuition. Rooting all aspects of decision within the heart. So checking in with the heart as you're going to make decisions. What does that mean? Doesn't mean that the brain doesn't get involved. The brain does get involved, but the predominant aspect of how you feel going into it is something that is rooted in the heart. Does that resonate with what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I remember when I came across the heart math teachings, and I think it was through Dave Asprey when I first heard about it as well, because he started talking about how he was doing some of that testing and the resonance field and the morphogenetic field that's created around the heart center. And another rabbit hole book was The Flower of Life by Melchizedek, which goes into
I was taught by him, actually.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I did some of those. There's actually I forgot what the actual name of it was, Flower of Light or something like teachings of meditations. Yeah, I've done those. Those are really interesting.
And the Merkaba meditation as well.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wear this on a regular basis. It's just like a reminder of like the Merkaba as an energy vehicle. But when you see things that mirror what happens in nature, like for example, the shape of an apple is the torus, right, which is indicative of the energy field, and then you see the magnetic field on the earth, and then the understanding that you have multiple energy fields working, so the heart creates its own Merkaba and morphogenic field, and then the body itself like creates its own, and so you have these working within each other. And when you have those teachings, or you're introduced to those teachings, for me, like, it just resonates with me. I'm just like, well, that makes sense. Like, you can describe it to someone who is not into this as like, hey, when you're in a room and someone walks into the room and you're like, oh, like you got a bad vibe from them. Like, that's part of like what's happening. Like, your fields are mixing and they're out of sync with each other, and that's why you feel like that. And so things like that are easy ways to explain to folks who are not that deep down these rabbit holes. But I think that all that makes perfect sense for me, and I think as you've likely discovered, like we're finding that science more and more is uncovering things. I'm using air quotes here for listeners, but uncovering topics that were or just known and have already existed already, and sort of discovering that them or making them more aware, because this has been happening whether heart math existed or not. Like, these fields existed, and kudos to heart math for giving us the language to talk about these topics.
And it's experiential, right? I think that's what I find as a heart math trainer. And as a meditator, there are two different aspects of it. And I think, my experience with men predominantly, because that's who I work with predominantly, is they want science. They want the proof that this exists. And as you begin to unfold the science and then lead them into an experience, once they experience it, the science doesn't matter because they've experienced it. They can't deny the experience anymore, right? And that's when the real beautiful path starts, is through experiential. How far can you go down that experience? How more deeper can you go through this? What is the discovery waiting? There's a sense of freedom associated with that, and as men, we're always looking to be free. Always looking to discover the capacity of freedom. So I think it's a beautiful journey that collectively heart-centered leaders, and I think my belief is that we're on the vanguard of this right now, just much like mindfulness was in the 90s and a lot of the other buzzwords within business communities. Heart-centeredness is really at the beginning of its incredible movement the next 10, 15, 20 years.
I think what's going to be important, as you say that, what comes up for me is this idea of discernment. And this idea of, when you say take what resonates and discard the rest, but also to be mindful of this, what you've actually outlined coming to fruition. So in my mind, I envision like a Forbes article, like the 10 best heart-centered, like whatever, how you can, how you make your next heart-centered business more profitable. Like it's going to be co-opted because as with everything else, it gets co-opted. And I think, so it feels like there's a need to set the groundwork for how we decide we want to appear, how we want to present ourselves in this, and what part we want to play in educating folks on this space and helping them understand. I think teaching people or having people understand that that's a skill that's important to cultivate discernment. Like and heart math can help with that, because when you think about someone, when you think about a topic, when you read something, when you enter a program, when you sign up for something, when you go, when you travel somewhere, does this resonate with my heart space? Is this a decision that's coming from the mind, or is this a decision that's coming from the heart? And I think the more people learn that skill, the more we'll be able to sort of make our way through that wave of what's going to come. It feels like with everything else that's good. Leave it in the hands of marketers, and it'll only be a matter of years before it gets sort of diluted. But I think to the people who are working in the space, I think discernment and just being strong with the practice feels like good guidance.
But it's also critical for me that what you do and what I do and what many others do is empower people, right? The empowerment part is different than where this old paradigm has come from and where we're going, because this command and mastering command system now, very few businesses are seeing fruits and labor within that system anymore, where I feel like the heart-centered is all about ensuring each individual is empowered to be their authentic self. That's another thing that's coming into play, is authenticity. And so the big questions are, who are you, right? Because if you look at a system that we were, very early on through indoctrination of education and through marketing and the social systems, very few of us understand that we are a whole bunch of things programmed into us, as opposed to understanding truly who we are as a soul, maybe as a human being, whatever that means, And I think that's going to be the incredible discovery moving forward in this heart-centered consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, to your point, more of an awareness and more people talking about it is going to be a good thing. And I think any tools that we have at our disposal and making them available to different audiences, like there's people that have not heard of heart math. There's youth in low income neighborhoods who could benefit from heart math. Like, what are the different ways that all these, modalities, all these things that help us lean more into our heart, like how are they being made available? From my perspective, like I feel like if I can help more people talk about these things,
right,
and give people these platforms, like I'll get to those million people through virtue of the network effect, right? Like if you reach your 10,000 and, she reaches her 20,000 and he reaches her 30,000, like, I can get to that number and then change the goal line when I hit it, and just more and more, because it's the message that needs to be heard for the times that we find ourselves in, because there's a lot of division happening now.
right.
And I feel like the reason we are at this place we are on this planet is sort of like a test to see how we move through this space. And so even things like the vaccine conversation is just another thing, whether it's race, whether it's vaccines, whether it's politics, all these little things are like, what topics can be introduced so that we can figure out what side we're on. And so, and it feels like a distraction, and it feels like takes away from the bigger conversation around how do we all become more heart-centered? How do we all become more tolerant? Like, just the vaccine is just top of mind for me right now, because it feels like, how do we learn how to have a conversation with someone that we disagree with? Where can we learn to be more loving with people just on the basis of who they are as a human being?
Yeah,
And we don't have to agree. We don't all have to agree on everything. Like, that's what makes us so special and unique as human beings. But learn how to talk, because that, I think that's a skill set that if we cultivate, something that I'm trying to get better at, being more clear in my communication, being more diligent in my, like, promises, in my responsibilities, in my commitments, and like doing what I promised I would say, doing what I promised I would do,
right.
saying what I mean. Just, these are all things I've had challenges with in the past, and I just want to be more conscious of being that person. And then it just feels like there's more of the focus should be more on that than all these other things that are causing distractions.
And I think the way to go through that, and it's been my personal experience, is to share your story of how, like you did to at the beginning of this, of how you got to where you got to. I think this is why I'm interested in having conversations and why I've started this YouTube show, is because so many individuals have had conundrums and how to maneuver and negotiate into the path that they are, but it's through that persistence and through that compassion of and the love for themselves that they then overcome whatever obstacles are presented in their way. And that's the bigger aspect as well. My other belief system is, Harry, that we are a world that is traumatized from the very beginning. No one gets out of childhood without some sense of trauma. And unfortunately, again, my experience has been, when you're talking to someone, you're really talking subconsciously, you're really talking to their traumas. And that's why sometimes, if you're unconscious about your trauma and somebody else is unconscious about their trauma, you just completely traumatize each other again, because it's your vantage point. You're coming from the ego. You're not coming from a place of compassion and love and support for that individual. This paradigm of division and competition, as opposed to cooperation and unification, which is, for me, the age of heart-centered practice.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting for me in my journey is observing and reevaluating, like, my relationship with my ego, because it felt like it was in the driver's seat for way too long, and it just,
Well, I mean, ego is important, right? I mean,
yeah, it is,
it protects you. I mean, that's
yeah,
its place for it. But in society and in the modern age, we've overemphasized way too much on the ego, and diminished aspects of other aspects of our being.
yeah, and I think it's something I feel like men need to also be more conscious of, because you can sense it. And I have a lot of female friends, and I can, when I can sit in that heart space much easier when
Yeah,
I have conversations with them. But when I'm talking to other guys, it's like I see them, like, on social, or I read something, like I'm conscious of it, and then I'm also conscious of making sure I'm not being judgmental. But I think it's something that I'm aware of. It runs very strong through men, and I think it prevents them from going down paths that would be vulnerable for them, like, and just, like, being able to cry in front of your partner, or being able to, like, express emotion, like, in public, like, all these little things that are, I think, are important, but they speak, just because of the stuff that I've read about this sort of 2,000-year history of the patriarchy, and this uh, male energy that's permeated a lot of what's happening in our world. But the shift, it feels like a shift, and it's something that I definitely want to lean into, be a part of, and help co-create.
I think that's commendable, because I think, um, the interest of men showing strength through vulnerability is really where we all need to go in that way. And there has been judgment and from women in that, some women anyways, I don't say most women, when men connect with their feelings and show that sense of vulnerability, that isn't strength. And I believe it's complete strength because it's their ability to express what's going on within their being. um, I think more and more men are looking for opportunities of how to do that and embody that, and in the process of becoming more fully aware of what their gifts are, right?
Yeah, and I think what's important is for you, if you're listening to this conversation with Z and myself, to ask ask and make an intention that this is something that you want more of in your life. If you feel like the calling for that, because there's power in vocalizing your intentions, and I've become more aware of that in recent years. Just this idea of like, I want to connect with more heart-centered men. Like, say that out loud, like, and just
Yeah,
you, and then be prepared and be aware and be open for the signs. And they're fun when you see them, and you're like, and you sort of chalk it up to like, oh, that's coincidence. It's
yeah,
not. I mean, it's a direct message from universe to you, and you can choose to observe it and act on it. And what I found is that, spirit will acknowledge that you've seen it, and then send a whole slew of other ones on your way, and just be like, okay, you're paying attention.
mm,
Okay, so that's okay. I've got your attention now. So now let's see what else I can send your way. And so it's a fun dance. It's exciting to lean into it and then see what exactly you can co-create. And Joe, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about it in his book, and just how everything exists now, past, present, future. Like it gets pretty heady. It's some
yeah,
this multidimensional stuff, but it's something. If you've ever seen Interstellar,
yeah,
it's one of my friends calls it a documentary. Basically, that
yeah.
final scene just was like, I was like, my God, this is it. Like this is what it's in my head, and this idea of all existing at once. And so when you know that potential exists, it gets exciting to feel like, okay, what's the code? Like, how do I get into that? Like, what are the pieces I need to put into place so that I can access, that doorway?
It's awareness. It's just continually increasing your awareness and being aware of where you're at, having self-care practices to enhance that awareness. Meditate. You talked about meditation. I think I don't want to call it mindfulness because I think mindfulness connotes a whole other aspect for me. I call it heartfulness because for me, when I meditate, I start by descending into my heart, and then there's a point of singularity that Joe Dispenza talks about as well, and John Volo Melchizedek talks about as well. Within that point of singularity, that small space of the heart is where the whole universe exists. We spend most of our lives on the outward looking for things from the outside. But when we start focusing on the inside within that sacred space, you find everything that you need in there. And so my practice has really been deepening that aspect of inner reflection. And there's been incredible things that have been happening. The more disciplined I become within that practice.
Yeah, and then when that happens, it's exciting because it validates that you're on the right path.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we as human beings, again, look for that validation, right? I remember when I was doing the John Vilo Melchizedek, and he does there's many ways to get into that sacred space of the heart. There's a masculine way and a feminine way, and the most easiest way is the feminine way. But I was doing the masculine way, and he was teaching us, and I'm like, okay, it's just hard concepts to grasp, right? Because it just seems pretty heady, and it's like I don't know if I'm doing it right. And
Yeah, yeah.
so I'm visualizing this. I'm visualizing this, and I have these visual images, and I think that I'm there. It feels right, but I never really knew anything. I come back home, and there's these resources that we have access to, and he does a video representation of what he was instructing us. And what blew me away was the video representation was the exact visual imagery I had. It just went, I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking, how is this possible? So I was doing it right, you know? And that validation for me was like the last time I kind of hung onto some sort of anchor that I needed validation. The experience is the validation in my view
Yeah,
now, right?
makes sense.
Yeah. So we just keep unfolding and allowing us to continually get into the heart space. And I think part of that heart space connection is really healing the trauma. And I know you've been a really big proponent of doing a lot of work on oneself. I've certainly done the same as well. And that's a difficult journey. It can be an incredible difficult journey. It has its ups and it definitely has its downs associated with it. But that the reward for that is that you become more whole, you become more authentic, is the way I would uh, maybe express it, or a different form of yourself, uh, closer to who that higher self is of yourself.
Yeah, and it's important to surround yourself with people whose opinion you trust, who you care about,
Yeah,
who care about you, and who challenge you also, and can help call you out. Like if like because you can think you're living the good life, and very quickly realize that there's still more work to be done, and realize it's a ongoing process, and we're not always going to get it right the first time, and just have a sincere desire to constantly be improving, like in the same way you would do it in the normal 3D world. Just on the spiritual side, like you have to be humble, realize what it is that you don't know, or you need more work on, or where you need help, or who you need to seek out. And if you put that intention that you are looking for guidance, in the same way that you're making an intention that you want to be more heart-centered, like I want to have more conversations like I'm having today, like I want to be share more spaces with heart-centered men, like I want to find teachings that help me understand what it's like to come more from the heart. Just it feels like an just ongoing learning. That's how it's unfolding for me.
well, and for me, it's important to build communities, and that's when been my work is really surrounding myself with both men and women that are interested in building heart-centered communities. I mean, obviously, we met at a Clubhouse chat that had heart-centered people talking about various subjects, and I don't know about you, when at the end of all those Clubhouse, I am full, I am buzzing um, with energy and just being because of how full it is, how complete it is within that space.
Yeah, and I think it was funny because I met Suzette, who organized that event through LinkedIn of all places. We were having a chat about heart center business owners, and she's like, "I do this thing," and she'd come on, and then I come on, and then you just happen to be in the room as well. So, but it's interesting because I laugh now because when it happens, because it's like I'm on a heart centered path. It's just like natural that I'll be connected with other heart centered folks, and so now it gets me excited to just have these conversations, and that's part of the reason that I let her know that I've made it aware, and so I'm gonna continue to step into that, and it's slightly uncomfortable, and um, gets me nervous at times, but I think that's where the value comes from, and because other people see it, and then you just need one other person to say, oh, that really resonated with me. I've gotten really good feedback from what I've been able to post recently so far.
Actually, I'll put the Clubhouse link for the next one at the bottom of this. And just as I will put the FullCast website for anyone that's interested to be in touch with you as well, because you've got an incredible full service for people interested in doing those podcasts, because there's value in having those conversations like we're having right now.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that's an important. I think there's so much more to unpack. I think we're just getting ready, Harry.
yeah.
I think it was great to have this initial little dive, as it were, and I hope to have many more conversations that we can then talk about all the things that interest us collectively.
I appreciate the opportunity to share this time with you, Z. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll talk another time.
Sounds good.